If any file is to be transferred from one of the computer to another computer, then operating system is the one which is responsible for that. Some of the file information, like some of the system calls, exist purely for transferring the information between the user, program and the operating system. What is the meaning of message passing? Suppose if I want to speak with anyone, any other person, I must have a communication medium, right? All these are certain type of informations that is maintained by the operating system, that is status information. Hello everyone, it is Dr. Ravi Kumar YB, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, MYSURU, the Temple of Excellence. In today's session, you will be taught about the types of system calls which you have come across in the previous session. That is, I had explained about the system calls in the previous session. In today's session, I will continue with the types of system calls which you will come across in the operating systems. If that is the case, there are 5 different types of system calls. The very first type of system call is process control. What is the meaning of process control? We require a data structure called PCB. The PCB stands for process control block. That means a process control block is the one which maintains the information of a process. What is the meaning of information of a process? That is process ID, process IO information, all other related file handling information, all other informations are maintained by the PCB. This PCB controls the process. That means what is the present state of a process? What is the information which is saved earlier in the process control block? What has to be resumed? What has to be the information given to the process during the time of resumption? All these are certain types of information which are maintained in the process control block. So this process control block is also maintained by the operating system. So this is one of the system call. Next one, file manipulation. What is the meaning of file manipulation? Let me tell you that. Suppose if you want to create a file, then you want to modify a file, you want to delete a file. All these are certain information which needs to be done by the operating system. So operating system is the one which manages the entire file manipulation operations. Then what is the meaning of device manipulation? A device manipulation is one which does the task of IO operations. These IO operations are maintained by the operating system. Then we have information maintenance. For example, the time, what is the time of process started? What is the time at which the process resumed or stopped? Process resumed. All these are certain type of information which needs to be maintained by the operating system. So the operating system is going to maintain this information maintenance. Then we have a communication. The communication is already explained to you. That is, if there is any networks like local area network, wide area network, metropolitan area network, personal area network, all those networks are used to communicate one of the computer with another computer. So this communication is also handled by the operating system. Suppose if any file is to be transferred from one of the computer to another computer, then operating system is the one which is responsible for that. So if that is the case, let me explain the process control. A running program needs to be able to stop execution either normally or abnormally. When execution is stopped abnormally, often a dump of memory is taken and can be examined with a debugger. That means there are 2 types of stopping the process, that is process stopping. One is abnormal stopping, and the other one is normal stopping. So in case of this normal stopping, everything works fine because there is no need to maintain any information. As soon as the information contained in the process control block ends, it gets stopped. But what happens when it is in the abnormal stopping? So immediately it has to be resumed at the point of execution of a program where it was stopped. It has to be resumed from the same location. That is called abnormal process stoppage. So the debugger is the one which is responsible for the abnormal stoppage. Suppose if there is any program is being executed, while it is being executed, if there is any power loss, then obviously it leads to an abnormal stopping. That has to be maintained by the debugger and which shall be examined in the debugger. So which is the next type of information? That is file management. If that is a file management, as I have already told you that create, delete, read, write, reposition, close are also called as modification. So create, delete, modify are certain types of operations that can be done on the files. So there is a need to determine the file attributes, that is get and set are the file attributes. Many times the operating system provides an API to make these system calls. So in order to manage all these file information, that is file information, we must have the management called operating system. So operating system is the one that manages the file information. By operating system. If that is the case, what is the meaning of device management? IO devices are there. The same information is mentioned here. The process usually require several resources to execute. The resources may be memory, CPU, time, or any of these resources. In order to execute, it requires many of these resources. If these resources are available, they will be granted and control returned to the user process. If these resources are available, that is granted to the process for execution. If these are not available, we have to place this process in the waiting queue. Waiting queue. What is the job of this waiting queue? All these processes which requires resources for execution needs to be kept in a waiting queue where all of these processes are kept. Then these resources also thought of as a devices. Some of the physical such as video card and others are abstract such as a file. That means these physical devices called video card. Then we have a floppy disk. Earlier we used to have floppy disk, magnetic tape, and all these are called as resources which needs to be maintained by the operating system. Then user program requests the devices and when finished they release the device. That means similar to files, we can read, write and reposition the device. Similarly, information management. What is the meaning of information management here? Some of the file information, like some of the system calls exist purely for transferring the information between the user program and the operating system. Please notice this point, very important. That is, user programs generate the user calls. That is user level. This user level calls are transformed into the kernel level system call. That is, this becomes a kernel system call. So we need to maintain all this information. For example, of this time or date. Also, OS also keeps the information about its process and provides system calls to report this information. That is, the information is transferred to this. The kernel in turn provides information to the user in the form of a system call, also called as system level calls. In this case, we are having the user level calls and the system level calls. Now we have the communication. There are two modes of inter-process communication. One is the message passing, as I have already told you that in the previous session, that is the message passing. And the other one is shared memory. What is the meaning of message passing? Suppose if I want to speak with anyone, any other person, I must have a communication medium, right? Which is that medium? Message passing. Which is that medium? Shared memory. So these are the two different types of inter-process communication that is helpful for message passing as well as for shared memory model. If I move on to the message passing model, it uses a common mailbox to pass messages between processes. That is process P1, then process P2. So between process P1 and P2, messages are exchanged. How the messages are exchanged? In the form of a mailbox. So we have all these information here. Then we have a shared memory. Shared memory uses certain system calls to create and gain access to regions of memory owned by other processes. That means, for example, if process P1 is allocated, OS remains here, P1, P2, P3, so on, all these things. So to create these regions, P1 is P3 is reserved with this memory, P2, P1. So we have the two processes exchange information by reading and writing the shared data. That means the information is exchanged between two processes in the form of shared memory. As I have already told you in the previous session, that is process P1 is here, process P2 is here. Between process P1 and P2, the shared memory region is created. Whenever P1 wants to communicate, writes the data into the shared memory region, and P2 reads the information from the written region. Then whenever the P2 wants to interact with P1, P2 writes the information into the shared memory region, and P1 fetches the information or reads the information from shared region. This is how the information or communication takes place between P1 and P2. So the system programs. The system programs provide basic functioning to users so that they do not need to write their own environments. For programs development, editors, compilers, and program execution shells, in some sense, they are bundles of useful system calls. That means useful system calls are used to perform the operations of editors, and compilation and program execution are all done by the system calls. This is how we are going to do that. Then we have a file manipulation. As I have already told you that create, delete, modify. What is the meaning of modify? Copy, rename, print, dump list are also called as the create, delete, modify. These informations are called as file manipulation, which is done by the system call. That is, generally manipulate files, directories, that is called as one folder within another folder within the second folder. So this is how the directories are placed, and whenever the cursor is placed onto the directories, certain operations are done, that is opening a file, deleting a file, manipulating a file, like reading the file, writing a file. All these are certain types of operations that are performed on the file. So this manipulation is also done by the responsibility of the operating system. So then status information. So the status information includes some programs simply request the date and time. What is the date of creation? What is the date of modification? What is the date of deletion? All these informations are maintained. And other simple requests. Others provide detailed performance, that is logging and debugging information. What is the meaning of logging and debugging information? The last axis time. What is the time of access? What is the time of login and what is the time of logout? All these are certain type of informations that is maintained by the operating system, that is status information. The output of these files is often sent to a terminal window or GUI window, that is called as status information. Then we have file modification, as I have already told you that, such as the editor's debugging are used to create and modify the files. Finally, we have a communication. These programs provide a mechanism for creating a virtual connect among processes. It is not a real connect, that is a virtual connect, which is done by the operating system. The operating system is responsible for communicating with the different processes. This shared memory is shared and this is going to be fetched from here to here. So the communication is passing here. So virtual connect is also done by the operating system. Then users and other computers. Email and web browsers are a couple of examples. In case of email, everything, when a sender sends a message to the receiver, it is not directly delivered to the receiver. Instead, it is delivered to the POP3 protocol. The POP3 protocol is the one post office point-to-point protocol. We have PPP, but in this case we have POP3. What is the meaning of POP3? Post Office Protocol version 3. This protocol is responsible for delivering the message from sender to the mailbox and in turn from mailbox to the receiver. So we will be having certain information in the mailboxes. So this is how we are going to perform the communication. So this completes today's session. So if you have any questions, kindly come back to me. I will definitely help you out. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all.